A Jungian and a Witch podcast. I'm your co-host, Molly, the queen behind Queen of Cups Apothecary and your resident witch. This is my dad, Steve, a Jungian analyst with over 30 years experience, a master's in divinity, and a myth expert. Join us as I get the Jungian perspective on a wide range of witchy topics. Hello and welcome to another episode. Today, Dad and I will be talking about development and the developmental stages of life. This is a breakdown of how humans come to understand things and grow, and there are several different developmental systems. Today, we will talk about Ericson's developmental stages, Jung's developmental stages, and Kohlberg's stages of moral development. And as Dad will comment later in the episode, there is something that is unifying about knowing that we all go through these stages at some point in our life. And just knowing that everybody goes through things together, that there are things that are inherently human that each of us go through. The stages help us to understand people's growth and ways that we change throughout our lives. And there are several theories of human development, but we will be focusing on Ericson's, Jung's, and Kohlberg's stage of moral development. I hope you enjoy our discussion on development, and I'll see you on the other side. All right, Dad, here we are, back for another week.
Here we are, and it's summer coming on. It's good.
It is. So I think then today from my list, and this is one that you have said that you are very, very into and you talk about a lot, and that's the developmental stages.
Oh, the developmental stages.
Yeah, because I thought, well, you know a lot about that and you like talking about it, so let's talk about the developmental stages.
Great. What do you know about developmental stages?
So what I remember from my one class that I took going into teaching before I bailed was that we talked about developmental stages. So like the infant to toddler to young child, older child, and then adolescent, and then like pre-adult, adult, something like that. There was like a weird in-between stage, if I'm remembering correct.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. That's stuck in here the last like 8 years or whatever it's been.
Boy, you have a good memory. There are several different schemas of stages. I mean, it's not all the same. In particular, I mean, I was thinking about Ericson's 8 stages.
Okay. And I feel like I remember that name. I feel like that
yes, he was a neo-Freudian analyst, popular in the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
And then, I mean, Jung had sort of two basic stages.
Okay.
So, and then, of course, there's Piaget, who has more stages than that. And then those would be mostly for children. And then also there are stages of moral development, which is interesting, which is Lawrence Kohlberg, and he has 6 stages.
Of moral development specifically.
Yeah, how a child thinks about right and wrong, good and bad, versus how a teenager, versus how different levels of adults. But the basic part is, I mean, what is a developmental stage? You know, what is development? And we very often think of it with kids because it's the most obvious with kids.
True.
That you can see that obviously when they're very young, an infant, that there are certain things they can't do. There are certain thoughts they can't have. There are certain concepts they cannot possibly understand.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
we think of that as brain development, and the immature brain is still forming, right? And it's
Yeah.
because it's not formed, and apparently it's very sensitive to environmental influences and things like that that can interrupt development. So that's the first way we think about it.
Hmm.
So, for instance, you have a 4-year-old, and
Yeah.
let's say, how is your 4-year-old doing with the concept of time?
She's just starting to kind of figure that out. Yeah. That, we told her we're going on a trip, and she's like, but I don't want to go. And I'm like, well, we're not going right now. And then telling her we're going in 2 weeks, we're going in 1 week. And then, it's 7 days or 7 sleeps. And she seems to understand that. And she's remembering winter versus spring. So she doesn't remember really last spring because she doesn't remember the worms, like her pet worm named Dirt. And she's lots of things she's saying, I've never seen this before, I've never seen this before. And it's like, no, you just don't remember seeing it last spring. But she remembers winter. Right now she remembers winter. She remembers it was cold and now it's hot, and that it will get cold again. I mean, because we live in New England, so we have very seasonal weather. And I think seasons help that too. I think if it was the same temperature all the time, it would be really hard, but seasons
So,
help.
let's say, the concept of time is very difficult
Mm-hmm.
as an abstraction, like we talked about, I think, in a previous episode, and as a part of
Mm-hmm.
executive functioning, because it comes in slowly to have the concept of time, and then as you get too old and age and have memory issues, the executive function drops away again,
Right.
and then you also have trouble with time.
Yep.
That's that's a clinical test for Alzheimer's. By the way,
Oh.
is that you ask a person, please draw 11:45 as a clock,
Oh, no, no. I could see how that could be
and past a
really
certain
confusing.
people can't do it at a
Mm-hmm.
certain age, right?
Yeah.
Much
Yeah.
less if you ask a 4-year-old to draw 11:45 on a
Oh,
clock.
no, she wouldn't be able to do that.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So Piaget, for instance, calls that development concrete operational thinking.
Okay.
Uh,
Concrete. Like,
Operational thinking, as in
doesn't
very
change.
specific,
Ah,
concrete is in specific,
yeah.
and operational as in this leads to that, like that concept.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
this leads to that. So
So it's morning and then it's
how do
afternoon.
the lights
Like,
work? You turn on this
ah,
switch and the light comes on. That's
okay.
concrete and it's operational,
Okay.
right?
That makes sense. Yeah.
As opposed to well, that there are power plants, and they put the energy in the big wires, and then the wires come a long way, and then that wire, and like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's not what I mean.
Yeah, that's high
How do the
level.
lights work? You
Mm-hmm.
flip this switch and it
Right.
works.
And it works.
Good. See, that's
Mm-hmm.
so concrete. And so,
Yeah, it is.
and let's say that's more for a 6-year-old, right? And that you'll get to the why stage.
Oh, why?
Why this?
Yeah.
Why that?
Mm-hmm.
But that's the brain developing this capacity for concrete operational thinking. And then that's why
Mm-hmm.
it occurs to the child that,
Yes.
wait a minute, why this? Why that? I never thought of
Mm-hmm.
that before. Like, I just took it for
Mm-hmm.
granted. The lights come on. Okay. But why?
But why? Yeah.
See?
Then you have to explain electricity to a 6-year-old.
Except in a concrete operational way. Not
Mm-hmm.
they're not
Mm-hmm.
ready for a more advanced concept yet.
Scientific lesson.
And so,
Yeah.
but let's say, I mean, concrete operational thinking is one example of the idea that as the brain matures and develops, certain capacities come with that.
Okay.
And that prior to having those capacities, you have to give space, right? It's like it's not fair to ask a 4-year-old to draw a clock. Like,
Much less like a electrical circuit, you know?
Right. It's not going to happen.
Hmm.
You have to wait for, now here's another concept in developmental thinking, the developmental window. I mean, that's
Mm.
what I say. So that's why,
Developmental winner.
in
Yeah.
addition to these names for different kinds of capacities,
Mm.
that's why when you see a list of developmental stages, you see ages. So it's like that's
It's a bracket. Yeah.
it's the window from this age to that age is the time of this particular thing happening, or
Hmm.
the struggle to master or learn that particular capacity.
Yeah.
It's a developmental window with a little bit the idea that they build on each other, that there's a sequence,
Mm.
that first you have to be able to have concrete operational thinking.
Right.
Then you build on that
Mm.
to add the things after that.
Abstract
Yes.
thinking and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Abs-
Okay.
you build. And so the window part is that in this sort of developmental rollout, that during the time that is the appropriate developmental time, that should be happen. And if it does not happen, like you miss a stage, you miss a step,
Mm.
it is very difficult to go back and pick it up later
Right.
because they build
Hmm.
on each other.
Like reading and language.
They build on each
Yeah.
other, and there's a certain window of time in which now is the time
Right.
to
Right.
to learn to read. It's
Yeah,
like
exactly.
your brain is there, and it's difficult later to go back. And let's say, I mean, for most of history, most of people have been utterly illiterate
Well,
and
yes.
never did learn to read. But then they learned to read as adults. Let's say
Hmm.
now,
Yeah,
and
or
that
learning another language is much easier as a child. And then,
it's all much easier as a child to go back and try
yeah,
to learn. I mean, you can do it, but
it's a
it's
lot harder.
more effort. So that's the idea that
Hmm.
there's stages in a certain sequence, building on each other, building, 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 building.
Okay.
Okay, next part. So unlike Piaget, who dealt with kids,
Hmm.
children, then there's the idea that our developmental stages do not stop magically
Right.
at age 18,
Right.
and then there are no more developmental stages.
Right. We're just good after that.
Hmm With a
Oh.
little bit the idea that there are developmental stages through the whole life cycle,
Mm.
never stops.
Mhm.
And
So that was
each,
Piaget came up with that?
no, that
Ah,
would be back now to
Eric.
Ericson,
Yeah, Ericson.
right?
Okay. Yeah.
Although Ericson includes childhood also.
Well, yeah.
So let's just go through Ericson, and then remember he's a neo-Freudian analyst, so he
Uh,
is thinking in a somewhat Freudian way.
Freudian.
But
Yeah.
this is helpful,
Hmm.
and he phrases each stage as two alternative outcomes, and like that's the wrestle, that's the struggle, which outcome will prevail at that particular stage, right? So everything is
Mm.
versus that, this outcome versus the other
Ah,
outcome at each of
okay.
the 8 stages. So, for
We're
instance,
interesting.
his first stage, which is from birth to 18 months old, so
Okay.
essentially pre-toddler, is as in pre-walking. The first stage is
Yeah.
trust versus mistrust.
Interesting.
So he thinks that as developmental stage, it's like, what is going on in infancy, and that is the development of a basic sense of trust of the world and the environment.
Hmm.
And again,
Ah,
at that time in that window, well, you'd have to call that, the good enough mother. The
oh,
child
geez.
feels safe,
Save.
protected,
Yeah.
cared for, nurtured, and then
Mm.
trust that. Like,
Yeah. Mm.
whereas, let's say with some kind of trauma, neglect,
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
kinds of things, mistrust. See, that's if there's a failure at that stage of life to build a dependable environment, then there's mistrust. I mean, nowadays we might talk about various kinds of attachment disorders due to various things
Okay.
going
Yeah.
on, so that the
Mm-hmm.
trust part would be a secure attachment style. It's like that's trust. It's
Okay.
like
Okay.
the care was consistent, predictable. That's a
Mm.
secure attachment style. Whereas mistrust would be there were things going on, and so then there would be an insecure attachment style.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay.
And
It
it's
does, but it
all
also seems like, is it through more, I mean, and as I'm just thinking about working with little children, and is it more, is it just the parents, or is it about literally everything? Because they're exploring the world for the first time. So, like, is it safe to
uh
roll over? Is it safe
yeah.
to
Hmm.
touch this toy? Or is it more specifically about interacting with other humans in its life, in their life? Sorry, it's a human child
I
we're talking about.
think that I mean obviously it's mostly about the parents
Mm-hmm.
that is building a sense of self. Piaget deals more with sort of these very physical developments like gross motor development,
Right. Okay.
fine motor development. Yes, and
Mm-hmm.
those have stages too.
Yeah,
Right.
they do.
For
Mm-hmm.
instance, gross motor development is sort of the stage of your 4 year old right now, in which
Right. Yeah.
uh, she is developing and practicing being very athletic and balanced, and
Mm-hmm.
she has tremendous gross motor skills,
She does. Yeah.
better than I do, for instance. But her fine motor skills, coloring and in the line, and
She's getting there. I mean, she's
she's
better than
getting
she
better,
was,
right?
but
It's like, well, she's
mm-hmm.
moving into that developmental window for fine motor skills.
Yeah.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
that's more Piaget. Ericson is being more psychological, like the
Right.
psychological issues
Okay.
in a person's life that may come from trauma in birth to 18 months, trust versus mistrust.
Okay. So it's just framed a little bit differently.
In
Okay.
it's looking at the psychology. For instance, like now
Mm-hmm.
stage two is autonomy versus shame and doubt. That's not he didn't put shame and doubt. Autonomy versus shame. Toddler, so 18 months to 3 years. And that again, that's psychological. It's like autonomy
Right.
is the psychological feeling that happens when you can walk. And it's like
Right. Well, it's
I
I can do it by
I can
myself.
do what I want to do
Yeah.
when I want to do it. Autonomy is psychological, and
Right.
the
Mm-hmm.
Freudians have a term called the rapprochement crisis, which is that
Rapprochement. Is that a French word?
well, so you think yes, it is
Mm.
to have to reproach something. See, is
Oh.
and when we have a rapprochement, it means that we work it out. That's a working out,
Oh. Okay.
right?
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
you have an issue with me, and I have an issue, and we talk, and then we reach a rapprochement.
Okay. And so,
Now,
but we're talking about like toddlers, though.
for a toddler, the autonomy part, see,
Mm.
causes a crisis in the
Right.
sense
Mm.
you're a parent is that it is very inconvenient for this child to have autonomy.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
It's very inconvenient for
Yes.
this child to have a mind of her own and what she wants
Hmm.
to do. And like, no, you actually really have to get in the car right now.
Right.
I
Exactly.
don't want to.
Hmm.
That's the autonomy.
Yeah.
Okay, and
Yeah.
then you see the crisis that represents
Mm.
because
As yeah.
now comes how will the parent react to the child's autonomy?
Right. Right.
And
And that's a big issue.
will the child be taught or not taught, it's not teaching, right? It's just experience that
Experience. Yeah.
you even though it is inconvenient for me, yes, you're allowed to be autonomous. Okay. Like that's one way of working out the rapprochement crisis, but the other way is that I'm bigger than you are, and
Right.
you can't do this,
You're gonna do what I say. Yeah.
and crush the autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's the shame and doubt.
Yeah, it's very Matilda to me.
I mean, if it's crushed, then
Mm.
again, at that developmental age,
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
very hard to get it back later.
Yeah. I mean, do you
So
remember Matilda, the movie slash book? Roald
slightly,
Dahl.
yeah, yeah,
Danny
slightly,
DeVito. So just picture
oh, yeah,
1990s Danny DeVito. I'm big, you're little. That's what he says to her. That's the whole thing.
right. They're sort of the
Mhm.
most terrible parents ever in the movie, I guess is
Yeah,
what I'm.
exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm. All of
Well,
Roald Dahl, the parents are always awful.
well, and then I'm a psychoanalyst, and you would say, yeah,
Right.
Roald Dahl, like, what was going on when you were from 18 months to 3 years old?
Well, I know he was in private school. He was in like boarding school all growing up. So I'm assuming when he was a little kid that there was a lot of issues.
So you see
Yeah.
how important that
Mm-hmm.
rapprochement crisis is,
It is,
and in a
yeah.
way, it has to do with how neurotic the parent is.
Mm.
Because let's say it takes a very strong, healthy ego to endure the autonomy of the child.
It is enduring too, because you
You
have
just
to.
endure it. Like a certain young child who's 4 years old, I
Mm-hmm.
remember as three. Yeah, we went to the park, and then
Mm-hmm.
uh, she asserted her autonomy and said, "No, I'm not getting in the car." Well, we kind of need to go home. No, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And then she sits there and she pouts.
Well, it's. I think this is the parenting strategy. I said, "This is what have to happen." So I'm going to stand over here, and
Hmm.
you tell me when you're ready. But this is what's going to happen. And
Right.
walked away.
Okay. And she
Oh,
took her time, right?
yeah, couldn't have been 2 minutes.
Yeah. And then she was ready.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's been really good about that for a long time. But actually, yesterday, she had
Mm.
her first one in a long time. And we went to the lake for the first time. There's a lake near us. And for the spring, so to her, it's new again. She's like, I've never been here. And we're like, no, you've been here a lot. You just don't remember. And she did not want to leave. She did not want to leave. We were there for 2 hours. She was exhausted. And she hasn't had a meltdown like that in a long time. But yeah, I think that's those moments that parents all dread with the kid
Right. But that,
screaming and I don't want to.
but
Then
then
you get embarrassed because you're
you,
in front
you,
of all these
yeah,
people and you're like,
but, but
but
see,
you gotta let her do it. So yeah,
the neurotic parent, right, is
Mhm.
that I'm bigger than you are. I will crush you.
Right. Or I'm just gonna pick you up and we're gonna leave.
Well, that's the
Yeah,
bigger, right?
exactly.
And which is essentially like you have to think like Ericson, you have to think like an analyst, which is essentially saying that my emotional needs are more important than yours.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
My emotional needs,
I can't handle this, so you're just gonna have to
you're gonna
yeah.
you're gonna do it. And then that becomes the
Hmm.
pattern of everything.
Ugh,
Is that
yeah.
your job as my child is to serve my emotional needs.
Mm, yeah, poor
Now that's
kiddo.
neurotic, right? I mean,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Versus the opposite, right?
Right.
Is
It's
that
just
I'm the grown up, I'm the mom.
right. I'm gonna
You don't have
stand here and
you
let
don't have
you.
you don't
Yeah.
have to worry about my emotional needs or think about. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a grown up. I'll take care of my own emotional needs.
Exactly.
You're a child, and your job is to be a child.
Exactly. Yeah.
See,
Mm-hmm.
that's what all
Yeah.
this is about. I mean, that's what Erickson's
Exactly.
talking about. Okay, stage three, the preschool years from 3 to 5, and here you go. Initiative. He calls it initiative versus guilt.
Okay.
So initiative is not quite the same thing as autonomy. It's each one is a bit more developed, right? So that
Yeah. Okay.
initiative means to have your own interests essentially
Right.
to
Okay.
and then to pursue that.
Mm. Okay. And then guilt.
Right. So initiative is a good outcome, right?
Yeah.
You want kids to find their thing and to do
Right.
their
Be
thing
curious
and
and
take initiative and then support that initiative. Okay, you're interested in dragons, let us say,
dragons
and
or dinosaurs, yeah.
and here's some things if you want to do that about, do it. And then that, like we've talked about before, the sort of play aspect, self-initiative play,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the parallel play. I mean, this is where the parallel play really comes in, right? It's that the nurturing parent gives a space in which the child has autonomy and initiative, like to go do her thing, and I'm going to
Exactly.
do my thing, and I'm not interfering in you doing your thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the parallel play.
Yeah.
Versus when it does, guilt would be in the long run,
Why are you doing this?
you can't do this.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like it.
Uh,
No, you need to be interested in this, not that.
yeah. Oh, like
And then
you can't play with dolls, or
no,
you can't play with
or play with
trucks, or
trucks, or
whatever it is. Yeah. Yeah.
and you see, then
Hmm.
that's a sort of a very basic guilt about what I want is
Yeah, that's tough.
bad,
Mm,
or at least my mother says it's bad.
right, right.
So why do I want these forbidden
Things that are
things?
bad.
And
Yeah.
that's guilt.
Yeah. And I could see how, particularly with gender roles, it'd be really tough because it's like, well, my sister can play with dolls. Why can't I play with dolls? And then inherently there's like this what is wrong with me thing that comes up, that they can do it and I can't.
That's the guilt. See what I
That's the
mean?
guilt. Yeah.
So, see, and these are developmental phases. It's like this particular kind of problem comes up at a certain age.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, this is, as he says, preschool, three to five.
Yeah.
All right, stage
Mm.
4, 6 to 11. So the elementary school years,
Okay.
essentially, right, is industry versus inferiority
Industry
versus it.
versus inferiority.
Right. So uh,
Okay.
you have to think of it when he says industry, he means the ability or the capacity to be industrious,
So like to make things?
hmm to be competent,
Mm.
and mostly
Hmm.
like psychologically to feel competent, to feel I am competent. I
Right.
am competent at this, and I'm competent at that, and
Right.
that's industry.
Okay. Okay. And then inferiority.
Inferiority is a failure. Then it's like I am
Uh,
not competent. That's
okay.
you feel inferior. Like these other kids are. What is wrong with me? The other kids
Right.
are doing it, and I can't do it, and
I
that
can see
develops
that.
the sense of inferiority.
And yeah, that's really tough, especially
Oh,
with our school system because they try and teach everybody the same way. So a lot of kids feel inferior when they're just different learners.
right.
Speaking
Or
as a kid who was dyslexic.
well, I was going to say various learning disorders, right? I mean
Hmm.
that's the struggle,
It is.
right?
Yeah.
Is that
Hmm.
you have, a learning disability.
I
Fine,
had to go to special
there are
classes and
ways to work with it and everything,
hmm.
but right, it's easy to feel less than
Yeah, definitely.
the other kids
Hmm.
because they're doing it and you can't do
Right.
it.
And I can't. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's tough.
So Erickson is saying this age, that elementary school age is the age in which, I mean, all these things last a lifetime, or it's
Right. Right.
very hard to go back. Like if
So
you
if somebody has
develop,
like an inferiority complex, you're like, okay, so what happened when you were between 6 and 11?
hmm hmm
Okay. Okay. But issues with this stuff can still come up
oh,
later in life,
sure,
right?
absolutely. So that's why this like the developmental window is the age in which to get this sense of competency
Right.
is in elementary school.
Okay. Okay.
And then let's
So,
say you're a parent, and obviously you want what is best for your child. It's like then
hmm
that's the age of intervention. Then it's like, yeah, if there's something happening with a learning disability or like that, that is the
hmm
time to
to
have
deal with it.
the to
Yeah.
develop the sense of competency.
Yeah. Yeah. And I could see that
Again,
could
if
be
you
really tough.
wait till
Yeah.
later,
Like my friend who just got diagnosed with ADHD. She's like 32.
it's hard. It's
Ugh,
not impossible, but
I
it is
know.
difficult to come back at a later age and try and do something about this sense of
Hmm
inferiority.
Right.
'Cause
Exactly.
it's very deep,
hmm
right? I
Well, I know
mean,
for her, it was incredibly validating because she's
yes,
like, all these years, of course I was terrible at school. Of course I couldn't go to college. Like I have ADHD. It's just that as they've learned recently, that presents very different in women than it does in
than it
men.
does in men.
Hmm So,
Okay,
ah,
stage 5. See, we're still in his thing with kids. With that,
right, right.
I should go a little faster to get to adults, but
Oh, we'll
this
get there.
the stage
Yeah,
5
time.
he calls, and that is then the teen years, 12 to 18.
Oof, yeah, those are the tough.
Identity versus confusion.
Okay.
And I think you'd say
Mm,
a little bit role identity versus role confusion,
that makes
uh,
sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
or ego identity versus
Right.
ego confusion. And
The
again,
who am I question.
who am I?
Hmm
And that the window to work it out is 12 to 18. And in general, like,
mm
I tell people, it is usually, again, the ego formation about age 17. It settles
Around
in
there.
to here's an ego. I mean,
Right.
which is that I this is who I think of myself as being. I
Right.
am this kind of person.
hmm Yeah.
And
You
then
said here's an ego. I just picture like a box. It's like
yeah,
boop, and it just opens up and it's
well,
like
no, right?
ego.
It's a development, right? It's a long struggle, and they're like the role confusion, right? I mean, that's like the middle school kid, much less the high school
Right.
freshman, right?
hmm
Well, what kind of kid am I? And then there's
Exactly.
the confusion, experimenting with different identities.
hmm
And that's the only way. You have to experiment and sort of try it on and say,
Yeah.
well, I
Yeah. I don't like
kind
this
of like
or
goth, but I don't know. It seems a little over the edge to me, so I'm gonna dial it back a little bit.
be punk instead of goth. You talking about me?
Uh, No, it's just the typical thing. Ha ha ha. See, so that and the idea of the window, it's like you do see people who have role confusion going past age 18.
Okay.
Now,
Okay. So how is someone with role confusion? How does that play out?
think about how problematic that might be. Like, have you ever met people that sort of take on a different
Oh,
identity with each person they're with, or each
yeah.
boyfriend they're with? It's like their
Right.
identity is what
Mm.
someone else expects or needs.
The mirrors is what I call them.
Yes, it is a
They're
mirror.
mirrors. Mm.
And yeah, that
Yeah.
person does not have an identity. That person does not have a fully formed ego.
They're just reflecting whatever they see because that's what's safe to them, basically.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm.
Right. And then you say, what's the problem with that? I mean,
Right, right,
being a mirror, but then you don't know who you are. You don't know
right.
what you want.
I can imagine being alone would be the scariest thing for someone like that.
Yeah.
Because they don't know who they are.
Right. And of course,
Yeah.
there's trauma and various things that contribute, to that happening. But to follow Ericson, it's helpful if it all gets sorted out by the time you're 18.
Right. Mm.
Okay. But as we said before, it does not stop at
It
age
doesn't stop.
18. So
Yeah.
now here we go. Stage 6 of Ericson, right?
hmm
Intimacy versus isolation. young adult years from 18 to age 40. Intimacy versus
versus
isolation,
isolation.
which is essentially um, the ability to have a successful long-term relationship and relationships, plural. That's what
Okay.
that's what intimacy is, right?
Mm-hmm.
To
Mm-hmm.
be able to pull off having a long-term relationship. That
Hmm.
might be a love relationship or
Or
also a
friendship or
friend relationship versus
yeah.
isolation. So, and there are a group of people who cannot pull it off, and they don't have friends and they don't have
Yeah.
intimate relationships, and they're isolated.
Yeah. Hmm.
And the answer is, what is going on? Why can't you do it? Like,
Yeah.
what is happening? And then, there are all kinds of things that are happening that prevent a person from being able to have a long-term relationship.
But I feel like especially with this one, if you don't have the prior ones, it's gonna be
Well,
really
that
hard.
right. Let's say
Because
right
now
that
it's
you
not so
built on it.
individual anymore, because now you're with other people.
I mean, let's say that you had issues with identity versus confusion back in those years, that you
Mm-hmm.
had issues with industry versus inferiority back in those years, you had
Right.
issues with the initiative versus guilt back in those years, and
Yeah.
then now you come to the age
Where you're
and
supposed to be with
you're
other people.
you're bringing all of that into a relationship, and it's kind of tough,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you feel
Yeah.
guilty, inferior, and confused about your
All
role.
the time. Yeah.
I mean,
That would be really
that's
tough.
hard to have a successful relationship with that.
Mm. Mm.
And that, so Ericson's saying that's the age, that people wrestle with it. And the window, if you get to be age 40 and you sort of are on the isolation side,
Right.
again, nothing is impossible, but
The
conceivably
likely.
you're going to be
Yeah.
isolated the rest of your life then if you
Right.
haven't
Figure
uh
out how to have a relationship by then.
right without a
Hmm.
lot without a whole lot of work. I mean it could happen, but the time to work on it is in the correct
It's in the
developmental
time. Yeah.
period, not
Yeah.
after. Okay,
Hmm.
stage 7, which is he calls it middle age to age 65, so from 40 to 65.
Is 40 middle age? I guess
Yeah,
so.
it kind of is.
Yeah. You say I'm almost 40, so
Yeah, you need to
ugh,
think about that,
I'm
right?
changing stages. Oh no.
You are, well, and then the transition from stage to stage is generally a point actually where
Yeah.
people come to see somebody like me as the transition, right?
Right.
It's like,
Because
okay, the old stage, I mean, there were struggles, but I kind of got my arms around it now. And
hmm
now this whole new development thing
right.
is hitting me,
And I don't know
and
what to do.
let's talk about that, right?
Right.
So there you go. Stage 7, generativity versus stagnation.
Oof.
So generativity, by generativity, he means the ability to generate
Yeah.
work, creative work, let's say in particular. I mean, it's sort of to be industrious at a much higher level, to be generative.
Mm. Okay.
I mean, the idea that a 40-year-old, a 50-year-old, a 60-year-old is that you're somewhat at the peak of your powers,
Yeah. Well, and it seems like generous is in there
and
a
that
little
you
bit too.
you you have your skills, and you're not practicing anymore. Like, you are there,
Yeah, you're the
and that
master, kind
you
of.
can now utilize your skills to actually generate, like, yeah, I know what I'm doing, and I'm doing it
Hmm
because I know how to do it now, and I'm doing it, and
Right.
to be generative.
Hmm.
And then a little bit the idea, like, versus stagnation means, see, this is 25 years, right? From 40 to 65, is
Right.
that generativity means also a growing
hmm
and expanding your range of things that you can do competently. and being
Right.
interested and like learning new things, and all that versus
Mm-hmm.
stagnation, right? Which
Right.
is now it's like, yes, I know what I'm doing. I have
Just going to do
XYZ.
this the
I
same
have
thing for the next
XYZ.
25 years.
Yes,
Ugh,
there's no
yeah.
growth there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, this is what I do and I'm doing it. Period.
Right.
Where's the
Right.
generativity? I mean, no, that's stagnation. It's like, yeah,
Mm.
I mean, yeah, 20 years ago, this is what I was doing it. And
Doing the same
I
thing.
guess that's just what I'm going to do. And
Yeah.
yeah, well, I know that's hard for you to imagine a
It
person
is. It
like
is.
that, but there are
I'm sure there are people who like doing the same
people.
thing every day for 25 years, but for the two of us, it would be really, really hard. Yeah, can't
I mean,
really, it's a
I'll
hard pill to swallow, the
tell you
idea of
a
just,
story about your grandfather.
which
Uh,
one? Oh, Papa?
no, Pop.
Oh, Pop. Okay.
Your maternal grandfather, who was a very generative person, let's say,
Mm.
when he came back from World War II,
Mm.
this was in Michigan, and the auto industry. I mean, he was a veteran, but he was still working out what kind of job he was going to have and things
Right.
like that. He signed up to work on the factory line at Ford.
Oh, wow. Well, and I know he didn't stick with that because I know what
Well,
he did, but
uh, so speaking of stagnation, right? It's
right. Yeah.
the assembly line is rolling by. You take this piece off the assembly line, you put it on that
Right.
piece on the other assembly, and
Yeah.
you do that all day long,
I
every
would go
day.
insane.
All right.
Yeah.
So he's doing that, and they told him what to do and showed him how to do it, and then he's
Hmm.
doing that, and then uh, lunch break comes,
Okay.
and this guy is not exactly the foreman, but he's kind of a senior guy. He says,
Hmm.
uh, "Come on out back with me."
Okay. Okay.
And he says, "What the hell are you doing?
Mm.
You're going too fast."
You're going too fast.
You're making
Uh,
everybody look bad.
what did Pop say?
And you better stop or you know what's going to
Oh,
happen.
oh no.
See, that's the stagnation part. It's
Right, right.
like when you've been doing that for 20 years,
Hmm.
you you don't want to work too hard.
Right, exactly.
You want to
Exactly.
go in and do your shift and get your paycheck and go home.
Right, right. You don't want management telling me you need to go faster. Yeah.
Right. And so your grandfather, he was,
It's this young hot shot just getting it
yeah,
done.
yeah. It's like, okay, you told me this is the job, I'm doing the job. And so
Mm.
no, that's why he didn't make it 2 weeks on the line.
Yeah, I bet not. He likes to talk too much too. I can't imagine him
Yeah.
being stuck in a factory with like earphones on and it's loud and he can't talk to people. He would hate that.
So does that make
Yeah,
generativity versus stagnation make sense, and that's
it
an
does.
issue that you're wrestling with in this time of your life,
Mm.
from 40 to 65, you're wrestling with it in the sense of that, okay, you felt pretty generative when you were 40, but do you feel it when you're 50?
Yeah. Well, and I can also see from that story how the for people who are stagnant, the idea of changing or being generative could be really scary for them.
Mhm.
Like they're so being so set in what you're doing for so long. It could be really hard to change. I can imagine. And really scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as we said, these each one builds on the previous one, right? So now
Right.
we come to
Mm-hmm.
the eighth stage, Erickson's eighth
Okay.
final stage, which is age 65 to the end,
Okay.
which he calls integrity versus despair.
Oh. Okay. Well, I despair seems pretty easy, but integrity, I mean,
Well,
is
I
that
mean,
also about like leaving your mark kind of thing,
That's
or
the legacy part.
legacy? Yeah.
Right, that I talked about, I think, in our last episode. But, well,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, integrity is integration, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's the way Ericson talks about it is that he means that you get to a certain age and you can look back on your life and where you are now at 65, 70, 75, 80,
Mm-hmm.
with acceptance and
Right.
not a lot of regrets,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Like that's integrity. It's like
Yeah.
integrating all these different pieces of your life and say, well, yeah, there were some things happened and or
Right.
there were bad times, there were good times, and you
Mm-hmm.
know what? It's all okay.
Exactly.
Well,
But not for some people, yeah.
not everybody.
Yeah, I
People
could see
do
the
look
the
back
despair part.
with
Yeah.
lots of regrets.
Mm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
my life didn't turn out the way I wanted, and now I'm 70, and now I'm 75.
Right.
And
Right.
if only this had not happened, I would be in a very different place. And damn it, that person who, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, all of the regrets and
Yeah.
recriminations.
I call it the shoulda, woulda, couldas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then the despair is, right? I mean, mortality in the end, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like I'm 75 years old. I can't go back and redo it. And
Right.
I'm running out of time.
Mm-hmm.
And now actually I'm out of time and
Right.
I can't undo what has been done. And
So there's the despair part.
there's the
Yeah.
despair. And you do see despairing old people, by the way.
You see them?
Well, I see them.
Are they in the room with you right now? Sorry. Uh,
I see dead people.
Except it's old, despairing people. But do you mean like in your practice you see them, or
Yes,
just
I mean
they
yes,
exist
yes.
in?
I mean
Okay.
both. Yes, they exist in the population, and sometimes I see them in my practice. Yes.
Okay. Okay. I can imagine that there's a fair amount of despairing older people. Yes. And it's
Well,
unfortunate.
and then you have to work with people. I mean, again, at any age. I mean, I've seen, the oldest person I've seen is 90 years old.
Wow.
So see, it doesn't have to stop. And it's like,
Mm.
okay, yeah, let's work on some things, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you have
Mm-hmm.
regrets, let's talk about what happened and then
Right.
help them come to acceptance. See,
Exactly. Yeah.
acceptance.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think especially with I mean, my generation is the therapy generation. And I could talk astrologically about why that is, but we're very much breaking the stigma about going to therapy. And I think your generation did that a little bit. And then the generation that's 90 now, I think they have a large stigma about going to therapy. And so
Yeah.
I think it would be hard for them to be like, well, I'm going to do it. And I'm 90, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And kudos to any of the 90-year-olds out there getting it done,
That would be generative, right?
Exactly.
Instead of
Mm-hmm.
stagnation.
Yeah. Doing something differently.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hmm. I like that. Let's make more generative
People. So
elderly folks. Yeah.
let's say, so the whole part of any developmental schema is that everybody goes through it. It's like, and
Mm,
it is what it means to be human,
right. It's universal.
and that everybody who's ever lived goes through this,
Mm,
and that it is unavoidable. Conflicts are
mm-hmm.
unavoidable because they're just a
Yeah.
part of life. I mean,
Right.
they're
Right.
just a part of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know, I think that's helpful to know that sometimes
Mm.
what you're going through, you're not unique in going through things.
Right, right. Like
That,
everybody is going through this. Yeah. Everyone in my age bracket is having
yeah,
this same
and
issue.
I mean, you go through it in your own unique way,
Mm-hmm.
but Erikson is kind of talking about there's a bottom line in which it's something about this dilemma at this age.
Right, right.
Whatever the specifics are, there's a way to have a general idea.
Okay. Okay.
And then I would just add, Jung has two basic
Yeah, I
stages.
was gonna ask about where Jung stood on all this.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. Well, and it would be three because of what's in the middle. Jung, a
Mm.
long time ago, maybe among the first to talk about stages, talked
Mm.
about the first half of life and the second half of life.
Okay. Where was his dividing?
Uh, 40, 38. I think for
Oh,
him,
okay.
back, 100 years ago, it'd be more 35 instead of 40, but it's the same
Yeah.
basic age. So then you could
Okay.
say the third stage is the midlife crisis in between the first half of
Mm.
life and the second half of life.
Okay. But
And
so he's not doing like child adult. So he's
no,
saying all the way up until midlife, and then there's midlife
that
crisis, and then after midlife
right.
crisis.
And then so he
Okay.
he talks about the agenda of the first half of life being very, very different than the agenda of the second half of life.
Mm. I could see that. Yeah.
So that essentially, I mean, in the long run, that the agenda is then the deep instinctual psychological agenda of the first half of life is the outer world.
Oh,
So ego development, is like, is your ego developed enough to make your way in the
yeah.
outer world?
To
You know,
deal with other people
to
in
to
a functioning way.
to click off all the boxes.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Hmm.
did you work? Did you find a career? Did you
Right.
find a person? Did you get married? Did you have children? Did you buy a
Hmm.
house?
Right.
Click,
Right.
click, click of the boxes.
Right.
And Jung is saying in the first half of life, there's nothing wrong at all. That is the
Hmm.
impulse. And
There's that nothing is wrong at all.
with having boxes to be checked.
Oh, okay, okay,
That
okay.
it's
Yeah,
not
no, that makes
wrong.
sense.
It's not wrong to want to find somebody.
Right.
It's
Mm-hmm.
not wrong to want to have a career. It's not
Mm-hmm.
wrong to want to buy a house. To do all the things. It's not
Right.
wrong. Like because it's instinctual, developmental. And so I always say it's like you want the young people to think that way.
Right. Right.
You want the
You want us
young
to get jobs and buy houses
people
and
to
get married
have
and have
have
kids.
that energy towards those
Hmm.
things.
Right.
And if they
Yeah.
don't, then there's a problem. See, right? I mean, what if they
Mm.
don't have the energy for those things?
Hmm.
Speaking of
Yeah.
stagnation, isolation, confusion, inferiority, I mean, what if they don't have the energy
Mm.
pushing them to do those things? So, yeah, we want the young people to,
To
you know,
want to check off their boxes.
yeah, yeah. I mean, they can be old and jaded and cynical later. And we don't tell the young people what's on the other
Right.
side.
Oh, jeez. Oh. So then you hit midlife crisis, right? So you're like in the middle of your life and you're like, oh dear God, what's happening? How did I get
It's a
here?
kind of existential crisis
Yeah, exactly.
because
Hmm.
you get there and what you say is, I've checked all the boxes.
Now what?
Why don't I feel better?
Hmm. Right. I'm supposed to be
I have done everything that
living happily ever after,
yes,
right?
I have checked the boxes. I've done what I was told to do and I was
Hmm.
successful and something is missing and I
Hmm.
feel it. And
And now I'm halfway through my life and I don't know what to do about it.
there you go.
Hmm. Okay. So I buy a
Be,
big car or
oh, well, the typical midlife crisis
hmm. Yep.
things, yeah, which don't help, right? I mean,
Hmm. Because
what
it's not the things,
it's not
right?
what I've always liked about this is that I mean, there are people who all they know how to do is the first half of life things, and they do that for their whole lives.
Mm. So the people that work until they're like 90.
But well, no, their agenda is doesn't change. It's like, well,
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
yeah, I should check this box and buy a house. Well, I bought a house. Like, oh,
Right.
all right. Well, I guess I'll buy a bigger house.
Oh, okay. Okay. I see what you mean.
It's
Yeah.
like, well, I have a
They just,
career and I do my
mm,
thing. Well,
they
all
keep
right,
doing it.
fine.
Yeah.
I'll do my thing and get a bigger job.
Right.
It's just I'm just still checking those boxes.
They're stuck in the box system.
Yes. Without ever getting to the realization, it's like you can check as many boxes as you want, and it's not
Mm,
going to cut it
right.
because it's not about checking boxes. It's like that,
Mm,
getting that through your head.
right.
It's like, but checking boxes is all I know how to do.
Oh no. Yeah.
I got nowhere else to go. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a quote from a movie, An Officer and a Gentleman.
An officer and a gentleman?
Yes,
That's the name of the movie?
an old Richard Gere.
Mm.
I got nowhere else to go. The drill,
Well, maybe we'll have to watch it.
the drill sergeant. What's his name? The actor is
Oh.
Louis Gossett Jr. Is trying to get him to quit and
Hmm.
pushing him and hazing him and forcing
Oh.
him and I got nowhere else to go. Like, being it,
That's the line.
yes. Anyway,
Mm.
but people are like, really? It's see, like this is all I know how to do,
Mhm.
and it's like,
Right,
well, I'm
right.
sorry, because again, the instinctual, the underneath part is that it's like the whole agenda changes out from under you
Hmm.
as the instinct
Yeah.
rolls over. It's like you can't stop it from changing.
Yeah.
You only know how to do one thing. It's like, well, that's not going to cut it. And also,
Mm.
like, it's not about checking boxes. Well, if it's not about checking boxes, what is it about?
Right.
What am I supposed to do? And the agenda of the second half of life is personal/spiritual development.
Hmm. Okay. And this is what Jung said.
Yes.
Okay. Personal and spiritual development. So it's like we've checked all the boxes and now we have time for the personal development. Like, what about those of us who've been working on it the whole time?
I was going to say, you've checked all the boxes, and then it turns over, and it's kind
Just a
of
blank page.
it's a Zen thing, right? It's
Right.
like
Yeah.
you realize checking boxes is meaningless.
Yeah. I'm envisioning like flipping a piece of paper over that had the checks and now it's just a blank page. And you're like, you can draw whatever you want. And the people are like,
And the question
I
now
don't know how to draw.
is what is meaning?
Right. Exactly. When you take the boxes away.
And what it,
Right.
and that it's I mean it's not like universal meaning. It's like you have to work out your own personal meaning.
Hmm.
Like, what is value? What is meaning? What is worth it in life?
Right.
That is the agenda of the second half of life.
Hmm.
And it's a whole different process, right? I mean, it's a
Yeah, it
whole.
is. It's a different road to go down for sure.
And then you would say that's a little black and white. Like, for instance,
Well, yeah.
there are young people who are
Like I said, yeah, I've been working on personal and spiritual development for a long time.
like, you're 18 years old and you're trying to work out what is meaning in life.
Hmm. Yeah, that was me.
And, well, I'm not going to get personal here, but there's that other part about, okay, well, you can think about meaning all you want to, but how are you going to pay the rent?
Yeah, I know.
See,
I know. Yeah,
see,
it's tough to do both at the same time.
each has its place.
It does. Yeah.
I think that's all. Too far on one side, too far on the other side. But
Hmm. Hmm.
so that's the first. So that makes sense, right? The first half
Hmm.
second half of life.
And so for
Okay,
him, the midlife crisis was just
crisis
a
is the
point of
of the
chaos.
of the transition, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Cool. What do you think Young would have thought about all
Oh,
these other ones?
I think he would have thought that's great.
Oh
It's
yeah.
helpful. It's helpful. Yeah, I
Cool.
think he would have liked Ericson. Ericson's, came later.
Yeah, he said 70s, so that makes
And
sense.
then let's say just to finish, let me get Kohlberg here. I did used to have these memorized. Because I did it so often, I
Hmm.
mean,
It's funny how even when you memorize something, sometimes it doesn't always stay in there. Active recall, right? Hmm.
well, it's all in there. It just, yeah, you get a little rusty. So again, this idea of development, uh,
Hmm.
Lawrence Kohlberg, who was an educational psychologist at Harvard, and this is in the 70s and 80s,
Hmm.
got to thinking about, again, using Piaget and things we've talked about, like, well, what if, how do people understand ethics, morality, as and for themselves and for the world?
For
So
morality.
for instance, like his first stage is called pre-conventional, which is up to age 9. What is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, and the answer that it's obedience and punishment.
Oh. I can
So
see that.
in that way, and that's what a child understands. Well, this is right
Mm,
because I don't get punished. This is wrong because I do get punished. And that's what
right.
right and wrong is.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, then he calls stage 2 conventional morality, which is, he's thinking now of adolescence,
Okay.
which is essentially social conformity.
Right. Okay.
What is good is to conform. What is
Conform. Yeah.
bad is to
Just
be
be different.
non-conforming.
Yeah. Being different is
And there
bad.
is a way in
Mm.
which the kids at school enforce that
Right.
with, again,
Yeah.
punishment and reward. It's like, well,
Mm.
I get rewarded by by fitting in, so that is
I'm gonna
good.
do that.
I
Yeah.
get punished by not fitting in, so
So not gonna
that
do that.
is bad. So he
Hmm.
says, like, an earlier version of it is a good boy, good girl, right? It's like,
Mm.
what is it to be a good boy? What is it to be a good girl? And
Right.
and it is essentially convention.
Yeah.
That's why I
Yeah.
call it conventional
It's still
morality. And then,
external validation
oh,
rather
totally
than internal.
external,
Yeah.
totally external. And let's say then he says, like, a little older of a teenager who's starting to think and have, critical thinking and things like that, then
Hmm.
conventional morality would be that you say, well, it's maintaining social order.
Right.
It's that
Not breaking the law
if
and
people did not do this, then everything would fall apart. So we need to be
hmm.
good so that social order is maintained.
Okay. Yeah. Still very external. There's no internal
Okay.
clock yet of what's
Now,
right and what's wrong.
unlike the other developmental people we talked about, then Kohlberg starts to realize is that, and some people stop growing at that stage, and they have conventional morality
Mm.
for the rest of their lives.
Okay. So he's the first one to acknowledge that, yeah, some people don't make it through all these phases.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
So that the social order is stage 4, and then now we come to the post-conventional type of morality. And so stage 5 and stage 6. So you would say that some people going beyond conventional and begin to realize that, well, you would say it's the sociological function of myth of Campbell, right? That the
Mm.
moral order is actually a social myth, and that in different societies they have different social orders
Yeah.
and different moralities, and what is good and what
Mm.
is bad and what is acceptable and what is not acceptable are different depending on what culture you're in.
So there's a recognition of that.
So there's this awareness of it is not absolute.
Mm.
It's like your culture is like this, and that is not a universal absolute, and all the others are
Hmm.
wrong, right?
Right.
Or initially you might think that they're wrong
so
until you
now it's
realize. Yeah.
cultural relativity.
Mm.
It's like, well, I live in this culture, but other people live in a different culture, and they're not wrong. So because again, it's the sociological function of myth. Now that's a
Yeah.
big leap of thinking. You see what I mean?
It is. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
some people never get there.
Well, and it takes interaction with other cultures,
I think
or at least an awareness.
it takes development. Well, you can be very aware of other cultures and be really racist about it and think they're all
Oh, well, yeah.
terrible.
True, I
See
guess.
what I
That's
mean?
the
Like
other way that could go.
it's a development. Like something
Mm,
develops and changes that you have the capacity. That's what, a moral
mm.
capacity to see this
It's
kind
so
of thing.
crazy to me as someone who's traveled so much all over the place that somebody could travel somewhere and be like, all these people suck. Like, oh, you're all just going to hell. Like I could never, the people I have met around the
Well,
world have all been so amazing that I can't even imagine that you would do that to a whole culture, but it exists in our world,
well,
which
let's
just
say,
blows
see,
my
no,
mind.
back to Kohlberg. Let's say that you're
Hmm.
stuck in the conventional morality.
Right, right. And so you just
That's
think
all.
that they're wrong.
That's all you can
Yeah,
see.
that's all you can see. Ugh,
Okay, so stage four. I
okay.
mean, what do you call stage five? You're seeing, and then finally, the stage six is sort of universal ethical principles.
Mm,
Many episodes ago, we talked about Immanuel Kant and
mm,
the categorical imperative,
yeah.
which
Hmm.
is the first way of thinking about universal human rights.
Right,
Or,
right.
in a way, the stage six is a realization that there is kind of an archetypal order,
Mm,
and that what is right and what is wrong is a philosophical principle that transcends all culture. And yes,
well,
it's
that's
a
kind of a nice way to round it out, though.
right that it's expressed it no like the archetype as we've talked about, like
Hmm.
it crystallizes uniquely in each culture and has
Right.
different aspects in that crystallization, but
Mm,
there is a universal that is underneath all cultural formation.
okay.
And stage six, I mean, Kohlberg really thought that very few people.
Ever reach that level?
Mhm.
Oh. Hmm. I'd be interested to know what he would think about where we are at this point. If more people are reaching it now than there used to be. Because you said this was
Yeah.
the 80s, right?
Hmm.
Well, because I think with
Yeah,
the
it would.
development of the internet and the globalization of the world, it's easier sometimes to see that there is a broader overlying pattern.
It is, and our culture is not in a very good place right now. And
Oh, well,
there's a
yeah.
way in which it was more hopeful in the 80s.
Yeah, I guess I could. When you specifically talk about the US, I could see that that is an issue, but I think globally, there might
It's
be more people that are coming around.
um, so hard to say.
It is. It is really hard to say.
And
Mm,
but when you stop and think about it, then all the conflicts are about where people are in their heads. What stage of development are they?
mm.
Yes, if you were more stage six, you wouldn't have wars, for instance.
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
you wouldn't have projection on the evilness of the others.
Right.
And but obviously
Stage
those
four thinking there. Yeah.
those people are not there. They don't think that way.
Mm. Well, Dad, that definitely gives us a lot to think about. And thank you for sticking with me here. Development was a very interesting thing to talk about. I know it's something you're very passionate about. So thank you for divulging all that info for us. And we'll see you later. Bye,
Bye bye.
Dad.
thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed our discussion on development and developmental stages. And I wanted to point out that there are several different theories of development, of all different types of things that we go through in life, and that these were just 3 examples of that. If you want to find more from me, head over to queenofcupsapothecary.com. If you want more from Dad, go to his YouTube channel, History of Ideas. You can always check out our website, ajungianandawitch.com, or you can follow us over on Instagram. Feel free to reach out to us at ajungianandawitch@gmail.com with any questions you might have. Well, I hope you have a wonderful week. We will be back next Monday with another topic. Thanks again for tuning in.